So today I'm going to show you how I pasteled Bailey, this gorgeous bearded collie. Here are the materials I use. These are all Unison codes of soft pastel, but you can use any colours you have that are similar. Here I've drawn out the line drawing of Bailey onto the pastel matte paper. And the first thing I do is I start pasteling in the darkest colours using a black Faber-Castell hard stick. This is really useful because you can get those darkest underlayers in. So I'm basically going over my line drawing here, filling in the darkest areas I can see. Very important when you're doing curls that have depth to them. It's the darkness beneath the lighter curls that adds the feeling of 3 dimensions. Now I'm pasteling in some dark greens, some mid greens and some light greens into my background, which is a very basic distant grass effect. So fairly blotchy marks, popping them in, and then you can see me using my fingers just to push them into the paper and blend them together a little bit. Back to pasteling in the darker colours. I made a start here on the right hand side of Bailey, putting in the dark colours first, using some darker greys and some mid greys, and I used a kind of rolling pressure, rolling the pastel, the lighter pastel across the paper to get a very wiry random effect. Then, as usual, I started on the top left hand side, getting the top of Bailey's head in with some mid grey tones. Very important to not start with white, I think. I don't use my lighter colours till the end. And while I had this in my hand, I added a few other mid-grey colours where I could see them. You can see my marks are following the shape of the fur, always making sure that marks I make are like hair marks as they go onto the paper. Now here I use some lighter pale blue tones because the top of Bailey's head is facing the sky. So you don't want to go straight in with bright white, that always looks a bit too stark, and once you go white you haven't got anywhere further to go. So continuing with the mid greys, getting all the top of that head pushed in, going over my edges a little bit with that sort of bluey grey colour, and adding finer and finer details as I go. I'm making sure that I'm turning the pastel in a kind of a curl direction. Bailey's got these lovely wispy hairs on the top of his head, so here I'm using a white pencil to pull those out into the green background. I was a bit undecided. Normally I would work from the top left corner across my subject, so I've got somewhere to lean my hand, but I did dot about a little bit on this one and decided to get some of the background darkness in that go behind those curly ears. Now getting the eyes in, drew round them with a black pastel pencil, and then I wasn't happy with them completely, and you'll see I come back to those at the end, but using the pencil to refine my marks, making sure my highlight isn't white, it's again a very, very pale BV7 on top of a bit of BV8, which is a kind of quite a pale blue Unison colour. And now I start coming in with some lighter greys, adding those on top of my mid and dark greys, always making sure I reinforce the darkness between the curl shapes, and making sure that I drag the pastel in a mark that is as long as the hairs that I can see. You don't want lots of little dots and dashes when the hairs, like on a bearded collie, are quite long. Mapping in the outline of the nose and using the pencil to tweak any marks I've made, adding in extra dark pieces behind individual hairs. The hardest bit, I think, of this portrait, or not hardest but most challenging, was actually under his chin and those long hairs that trail down, where the hairs have got much warmer brown tones in them. So continuing to tweak, bringing some of those background hairs in. I couldn't work on the background for too long. It was quite a methodical, repetitive method, and sometimes I got a bit tired of that, so I then popped back to do some of the more perhaps interesting, definite curls on Bailey's muzzle and ears. Finally, on that right hand ear, bringing in some of the lighter tones making sure I keep my lightest colours for the top of Bailey's head and the top of his nose hairs on top of the muzzle there, where they're catching the most light. You can see those strange marks at the bottom are where I've popped some darks in and given myself some signposts in his curl pattern I can refer to as I fill him in. Blocking in the nose, darkening those nostrils up with my black Faber-Castell stick and using some dark 20 purple colour to block in the nose, really noticing where the light is hitting it. Some nice bluey tones on top, and then those delicate little wispy white hairs coming over the tip of his nose there. This is where I started working on the more brown shades of his muzzle, getting that warmth and darkness in, remembering that everything under the nose is going to be darker because it's in shadow, so nothing down here being as bright as the top of his head and the top of his nose. Working with the white General's pencil to get some of those fine curls defined, and the light grey pencil, Faber-Castell light grey, was really useful here as well. The pencil mark just pulling out some of the pigment I put on with the soft pastel sticks. Refining everything with the pencils, you can just get a really sharp point with the pencils, which helps mould the marks you put on with the more bulky stick shapes. And here we go, adding in darkness first, getting in those really darker shades under the chin, knowing I can always come on top with some much lighter pastels. Pushing in more blues and dark greys, refining the mouth. And the final straight was coming down the bottom of Bailey. I still haven't worked the background under his head and chin and those ear hairs. It's all very dark down there with some lighter hairs on the far left side. So I need to get some darkness in first, and then the lighter wispier hairs will come on top. So I had to raise the height of my actual board here because my hand was struggling to get the pastels on, so popped a couple of Unison Colour boxes underneath just to raise it up to allow my hand to make marks more comfortably as I work on that bottom edge of the portrait. So again, checking I'm following the direction of the hairs. They're curlier under the chin and much straighter as they go towards the left-hand side at the bottom there. Working the same process, darks first, then my mids, a few lights on top, touching and blending with my finger to soften the mark. And this did take a little while working this bottom edge, but very satisfying to sort of practice getting that wiriness and yet also soften the marks back by touching them into the pastels beneath to push them back in the portrait, because I want all the focus to be, of course, on Bailey's beautiful face. Working around using the pencil, light grey pencil was useful here just to sort of almost scribble on some little random wiry hairs, because he has got quite a crazy hairstyle really. Lots of layers of long hairs all curling round each other. And then working on the left hand side, getting the lighter hairs in where they're catching the light, and his hairs are lighter here. Making sure I get a good wave pattern going on. And I think at this point as well, I noticed I hadn't done an awful lot of pulling out of those top hairs, so using the grey pencil to make those top hairs much more wispy as they go onto their green background. And again, coming back to the eyes, I wasn't happy with the eyes. I felt I hadn't quite got Bailey's distinctive markings of darkness around his eyes, so I tweaked those a little bit. And here's the final portrait, Bailey all finished, ready for his framing. Hope you enjoyed that. Look forward to doing more of these.